I'm very excited to release this episode with Andrew McLeod. Andrew is the co-founder and CEO of Certn. Certn is the leader in trust solutions, focusing on providing comprehensive background checks and ongoing risk monitoring for employees, contractors, and tenants around the world. This was a really fun episode. I actually got some questions from Andrew's dad. We talked about Certn, the business, being a founder, sales, customers, and much, much more. Before we dive into the episode, I want to give a shout out to our 3 podcast supporters. VanHack. Let me introduce you to VanHack. Startups of all sizes choose VanHack because they only offer handpicked developers with 3 or more years of experience and who have strong portfolios. Great Canadian tech companies like Neo Financial, Fair, Wattpad, Applyboard, and League have worked with VanHack, and they had an amazing experience. Go to vanhack.com and check out their talent pool without having to log in and see for yourself. And when you sign up, tell them Evan from The Hard Part sent you for a 25% discount. Float. Float is a complete business finance for Canadian companies. They offer modern financial services, powerful software, and industry-leading support designed for every industry and stage of growth. Their integrated suite of products include corporate cards, bill pay, expense management, and high-yield accounts, as well as FX, which gives finance teams everything needed to manage spending and cash flow efficiently, so they keep pace with the demands of their business. To learn more, visit floatfinancial.com. Bloom. Just because the economy is uncertain doesn't mean your shred claim has to be. Bloom is all about predictable value. They're the only shred firm that guarantees their work. They meet with you every quarter and show you exactly how much you've accrued. And their pricing is posted online with a cap, so you know what to expect. No guessing, no surprises. Head to shred.ca and see why more Canadian innovators choose Bloom. Andrew, I want to start with your dad gave me some really fun questions. You just kind of told me you've always been very entrepreneurial. In high school, lawn care business, you had a business in university, treasurer at university. You said you somehow bought a house, rented out rooms, sold it at a profit. There's a lot of things there, but I'm just kind of curious, entrepreneurial roots there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was always about solving a problem. So how do I solve a problem with the resources that I've got? And I think that's just entrepreneurship in general. So It started off with, I needed to mow my lawn. So how do I avoid mowing my lawn? Well, I hire my friends to mow my lawn, and what am I willing to pay for that? And then I also figured out that I could go to my friends' parents and hire their kids, but they would also pay us to mow their lawns. And so that was my first foray into entrepreneurship. It also meant that I could get a truck, and I really wanted a truck. So it was all really a ploy to get a Ford F-150. That's what I really, really wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started doing this landscaping in my parents' minivan that they gifted me, 1997 Ford Windstar in beige. And I destroyed that thing, and then eventually found the truck of my dreams and convinced my dad to invest in my business and allow me to buy a truck. And it's funny because back then it was this would have been 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
You could buy a brand new F-150 for $20,000. Now you're $100,000
Yeah.
for some of these things. So in hindsight, it was a lot of money, but not a lot of money. And that has always been kind of the drive. I'd have a problem, whether it be, trying to sell textbooks. I'd use a textbook and I want to get money for it.
Mm-hmm.
But, back in 2005, when I started my classifieds site, you were basically putting up a picture of the book on a piece of paper that you printed and had your phone number on tags.
Mm-hmm.
And someone call you on the Motorola Razr and be like, I want to buy your textbook. And so I was like, well, what if you could just post it online? And what if you could do eBay, but local, so you don't have to ship it? And and then that took off, and I got some money for that, and I bought my first house, and I rented it to 8 people. So I basically just had a party house.
Yeah.
And I mean, it all just kind of paid my way through school, just trying to find a problem and solve it.
I like to talk about just transparency at Certn. I think, just being very transparent, fully open with the team. Obviously there can be risks in that, and maybe not everyone kind of does it different. How has that really helped Certn with growth when you kind of have focused on that transparency?
I think transparency is really important, and honestly, we've gone through different leaders in different times where transparency's been more or less of a focus.
Mm-hmm.
I personally have a really hard time with secrets. I have a really hard time with not giving people the necessary context that I'm seeing. So I'd say Transparency is a net positive, but it's also work because when you're transparent, you have to be transparent, but you also have to give context
Yeah.
to a level that most people understand. So you're transparent around whether you're hitting your numbers or not, but what does it mean if you're not hitting your numbers? Does that mean people are getting laid off? Most of the time, no.
Mm-hmm.
It might mean you need to adjust strategy. It might mean that you need to change. That type of stuff is like you have to invest in it. And if you do that well, then the team operates well. It becomes even harder when you're doing it internationally.
Mm-hmm.
Different cultures have different reactions to transparency. It's like, some places like, why are you telling me this? It's like, well, it's important that you know and that you have context.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at it too as everyone that works for Certn is an investor in Certn. They're investing their time. There are other places that they could work if they want to make an investment of their time.
Yeah.
And they are shareholders. Every Certonian has equity, so they deserve to know exactly what the investors know, exactly what the board knows, so that they can choose if they want to continue to invest their time
Yeah.
and or how they can deliver a greater return for themselves. Every ounce of work that goes into the business is return on investment for them.
How have you thought about kind of like co-founder relationships, like with Evan, like other co-founders in the business? Like, how have you kind of really like done that well? Like, there's like a nuance to it. Like what's worked really well from you from a co-founder relationship standpoint?
I had the really good fortune of working with my two best friends prior to joining Certn. We had a lot of success working together. We knew we could work together, and that built a lot of trust. So we've been able to have conversations that most people wouldn't be able to have and still maintain a friendship. We've been able to make changes. We've been able to be honest with each other. When you come from a place of 100% trust, it helps you work together. It also helps you have those hard conversations.
Yeah.
And I mean, my two co-founders, my two best friends, neither of them are in the business full time. They're still part of the business, but they're off doing incredible things. And that hasn't impacted our relationship. We're still super close. I'm involved in all of the other things that they're doing, just in the same way that they're involved in what I'm doing. I mean, we're a unit. We work together on a lot of different things. So even if we're not the face of whatever the other person is doing, we're always there behind the scenes. And I think that's really important. It's also been really good for performance. Like you have people that you can trust that you work with. The challenge is if you lose that communication, if you lose that foundation for which you started the company, that's where I think things can get rocky. So I know some people haven't had the best experience with starting companies with friends. I've had the best experience.
We talked about like transparency with like employees, but like, what do you think about just kind of like fostering like an entrepreneurial environment at Certn, and like people can like how do you kind of structure hiring and like management, whether it's like executive team or just more generally the company? Like, how have you kind of thought about that?
I need to do a better job of that.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been so focused on the outcomes that we've been running towards for a while that it feels like that innovation, or, for lack of a better term, innovation has slowed down for a little while, especially last year. So we've really been driving towards, how do you build smaller teams that are able to think for themselves, to make their own decisions? How do we give them the tools to be creative? How do we encourage them to think about doing things in a different way? And that has been working really, really well. Now we're also layering in what I call SWAT teams. So it's like you go in, you find a problem, and you solve it. You do whatever you can to solve that problem, and use whatever resources are at your disposal to solve that problem. And that's starting to work really well. The other thing that I'm really excited about is how do we build entrepreneurs out of Certn? So we have a fund where we invest in people that have left Certn. So former Certonians fund, if someone wants to leave Certn. In my opinion, man, this might be from my personal experience, like I love the people that leave Certn to start something. Like I want to invest in them. I want to back them because we hired them because they're talented. So they can clearly do something. So, for me, that's a really important next step. I wish that they would sometimes innovate within the company, but usually they're off innovating in a different space that might have more personal relevance to them. But yeah, I really think that innovation or entrepreneurialism is a valuable thing, and I mean I would love to have the perfect answer to how to create that, but we're trying.
How do you find those types of people, right? Like, I think, there's a lot of successful companies out there that don't really kind of spawn a lot of like other companies, or the people don't go on to do stuff. There's like obvious examples like a Shopify or something where like, lots of people have left Shopify and started new things. That doesn't seem to always be the case. So how do you kind of think about that? Like, do you hire for certain traits? Is it just once they're in the certain environment, they kind of see how like these things are done? Like, is it a mix of the two potentially?
I think it comes down to learning velocity. So if you hire people that are really comfortable with change and have a high degree of learning velocity, those people are eventually going to go start something. And I think the problem that we had kind of post the correction we've had in the last few years is we weren't really looking for that. We were looking for bums in seats, we were looking for talented people. But as Canadians, or at least in a lot of the founders that I talk to, we didn't really prioritize that learning velocity. And we also didn't need to prioritize people's comfort with change. There's been a lot of change in the last 5 years. We went from growth at all costs to, a new unicorn a day to, low interest environments to high interest environments. We went from political stability to political instability. We've gone through a lot of change. And I think companies that have focused on people who are entrepreneurial, who have that drive, who are comfortable with change and that learning velocity, like they're going to be the most successful companies. And you're also going to see a lot of new companies spin out of those businesses.
I'm curious with like all the things that you've worked on, like different companies before this, Certn now, like how have you really thought about kind of like potentially like timing or market opportunity or like other things, right? Like obviously like, hard work and doing things for a long time, like you've done that historically, but then with Certn, there's just something that's like clicked and like unlocked there from a business growth standpoint. So what have you kind of learned about like maybe those other kind of intangible things beyond kind of like hard work, great idea, that type of thing?
I think it's about knowing your customer. I mean, listening to what your customer has to say and letting them tell you the solution, and then you build it. I mean, a lot of people think that it's, luck that you find the right product or that you find product market fit. It's really your ability to listen and execute. Your customers will tell you day in, day out exactly what their problem is and exactly how it should be solved. And if you can just listen and execute, then that's the easiest way to get that. And in the past, when companies weren't quite as successful, I think for me, there was a limitation on my vision for growth and my skills. And I think, now, when I help incubate companies or when I invest in companies, like I can think bigger. I know the tactics to get there, but really it boils down to like, what is the TAM of that thing that you're trying to solve for that customer, especially that first customer.
From a customer standpoint and like selling, like what have you really learned about that? And potentially like, like there's the repeatability to sales, but also just like maybe like landing like that huge enterprise customer and maybe lots of decision makers, and maybe it takes a year or whatever that time frame is. Like what have you learned about doing that like really well?
Relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of goes back to listening to customers. You want to land that big deal. It's going to be really hard to go in there and convince that decision maker that you're the right company for the job if you don't have that relationship, if you haven't spent the time listening, because often there's a nuance challenge. Those big customers aren't always doing things the same way. In fact, they're almost never doing things the same way. And you really have to speak to how you're going to solve their problem. And in big companies, it's, how are you going to make that individual look good? How are you going to make their life easier? How are you going to get them that next promotion? Because at the end of the day, that's what everybody's looking for. So I've found it is primarily relationship driven. And then if you can execute on the things that relationship teaches you, then you're going to make it in all of these companies reasonably quickly. I mean, the speed of change in large enterprises can be challenging, but you solve a big enough problem. And
any like tactical things with like relationship building that's worked really well for you? Maybe just being authentic, just being yourself. Like what's worked well for you?
On a podcast, I'm me. At the bar, I'm me. On the sports field or the hill or wherever. Like I'm me at work. So for me, that's really important. And I try not to talk about work. So the first time I go to meet a client, I don't talk about they know what we do usually now.
Yeah.
It's like, what's your pain point? Like, what's the thing that you want to solve? What are your goals for the year? Tell me about your kids, tell me about your family, like the things that like I actually want to know about
Yeah.
for them, like from them as a human. And then I find with that, it starts to get into that level of trust where they're willing to tell you, what is the real problem? What is the real issue? Or like, is price the issue? Are there budget cuts? Like, do they need a lower price? Is it, something slowing down their process? Or in our case, like, is it they're losing candidates because it's taking too long? Is it a bad candidate experience? And you start to get into that sort of stuff in meeting 2 and meeting 3.
Yeah.
And then regardless of if they move forward, I had this the other day actually, built a really great relationship with this prospective client. Kept in touch. We hit it off personally. Didn't end up doing any business together. We touched base, every 6 months. He would send me an email. I'd send him an email. Just never really business related. A couple weeks ago, he came in and he was like, I've got a $12 million opportunity for you. I need to get this solved right away. And it's like, amazing.
Yeah.
And it's just, you put in the time with people that you enjoy spending time with that happen to be in the right position, and givers gain. You add value to that person's life, and they're going to add value to yours at some point. So you're going to have a net benefit if you can help them.
I like that. From a product standpoint, like obviously, like you kind of have your initial kind of go to market like space that you're operating in, and obviously you've expanded since then. How do you kind of think about like product expansion into different verticals, but also then product expansion and more to offer from a certain standpoint? How do you kind of think about those as you scale?
It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard because at Certn we want to go kind of further up the funnel in hiring. So, right now you do a background check typically after the offer is subject to background check. How do we get, right at the beginning of the process? Trust should start, the moment you interact with a business.
Yeah.
And how do you make that completely frictionless? But then you look at the types of stuff we do, like, it's relevant in hiring, which is a big one. We started in tenancy, which is a big one. It's relevant in any financial services. It's relevant in government. It's relevant in global mobility and payroll. Like, there are a million different use cases for what we do. So I find it impossible to have my ADHD settle down and really focus in one area. But we've been really focused this year on our ideal customer profile, which is people who are hiring at scale, specifically that are low in complexity. So we work in regulated spaces, but like we really want to deliver the optimal solution for people that are hiring in, grocery or, airports or retail, or, you're working on a ship, you're working in a mine. Like, these people, they hire at scale and they need to know really quickly whether that person's, in or out, because they might literally be getting on a plane to go to, a mine somewhere tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so that's really important.
How do you think about like building, starting the company in Victoria, which, Victoria's an amazing place, but like from like a population standpoint stuff, like, it's not known as a tech center all the time. Like, what was it like building Certn out of there?
We kind of had an unfair, and I don't mean this in a negative way, like we kind of had an unfair advantage when we started, because when we started, we had access to talent in Victoria that was fairly priced, very driven towards the vision, which is awesome. People in Victoria and Vancouver Island, like they run really fast towards the vision, and I think it's a Canadian thing.
Yeah.
Like, we're very chill,
Yeah.
but if there's something that we're passionate about, like, we run headfirst into it. So I think we had a superpower in that we were hiring in Victoria. We actually started the company in Vancouver. Most people don't know this,
Okay.
but the company was founded in Vancouver.
Yeah.
But it was really hard to find the talent to be able to start the business. And by that, I mean finding the talent who's willing to take the risk, because you had people that were coming out of, Lighthouse Labs or Red Academy or, any of these launch pads for your career in software. And, they're making at the time even like 100,000 plus, and, willing to take no risk because they're going to work at Amazon. They're going to go work at Google. They're going to go work at Facebook. They're going to work at all these great places that have offices in Vancouver. And we're like, we have, we got a little bit of money. We've been very fortunate, but like we can't afford to pay people hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to build this thing. And I was really fortunate that I bumped into a gentleman who was willing to take a bet on Certn.
Yeah.
Well, the bet was, I told him there's no talent, no money in Victoria. I was super wrong. We made this bet, and he found us talent and money in Victoria, and we all moved to Victoria. So that's how it all started. And we had these great people, and then the pandemic happened. So right at the time that we were starting to scale, it was like, okay, you can hire anywhere in the world now. So we were able to go from, there was 19 of us in the office in Victoria when the pandemic happened. By the end of 2020, there was 175 people around the world. And then by the end of 2023, there was like 508. So it's, 40 of whom are in Victoria. So it's like less than 10% of our employee base is still in Victoria, but the company it still feels like it's headquartered in Victoria.
What have you learned about just doing like hybrid, like remote, like well in the certain way? Like what has worked really well for you on doing that good?
So, I mean, remote's a thing. We're committed to remote. We can't go back.
Yeah.
It's a learning process. I'd say it's hard. I mean, I was in the office every day kind of person until I had kids, and we expanded through organically and inorganically globally, and then I wasn't home that much. I mean, this year so far, I've been home, like 1/3 of the time I've been home. So it doesn't really matter where I live, and also if we have an office.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I would like to get to, and I think where most companies are going to get to, is most companies that are focused on having top talent, it's how do you co-locate critical people? So how do you give people a strong, tight-knit group that's in their time zone, in their city, that they can connect with? In a perfect world, I'd love to bring those teams back to offices. I don't think that makes sense for Certn where we are today.
Yeah.
But like, I do really like the idea of aligning teams towards a geography so they can get together weekly, monthly, quarterly. And then I also think in the absence of those teams working together, you've got to get teams together regularly. So my exec team gets together twice a quarter. And that's, since doing that, it's meant our team is tighter and faster than ever before.
How do you think about building like a product that's like critical infrastructure? Like if my social media app doesn't work or doesn't open, like it's kind of an inconvenience. It's not the end of the world. But if you're not getting identity correct or thing like that, like it seems like it could be very impactful. So how do you kind of think about that? And maybe that just influences how the business and the company operates, product decisions, things like that.
It's a challenging one. I think there's advantages to being global. So, we've got people all over the world, Australia, we've got people in Canada and the US, we've got a big contingent of people in the UK, we've got people in Asia, and it's a blessing and a curse. As a founder and as a CEO, it was challenging. Moving towards more of an operator now, we figured out our cadence, and I feel like it's a little bit better. But from a support perspective and from like a real-time ability to fix stuff, it's incredible to have 24/7 support with very few people, if anyone, that's having to stay up late or work weekends, because on our Friday it's Saturday in Australia, on our Sunday it's Monday in Australia. At our 9 a.m. our 9 a.m. is 5 p.m. in the UK. So the UK's got like all the nights. Yeah. And then we've got all across Canada. So there's a huge advantage to being able to support like big critical infrastructure with a global team.
What have you learned about like the nuances of running like a global business from like people standpoint, customer standpoint? And I think that's like, a common rhetoric that you always want to hear is like, hey, Canadians need to be thinking global and building startups for a global audience. And you've done that. So like, what are some things you kind of learned about actually doing it that way?
People are hard.
Yeah.
And it takes practice.
Yeah.
I've really learned that people are, despite speaking the same language, I think sometimes we have more in common with people that speak different languages than we do with people that speak our own language. And I think we take for granted as Canadians the fact that, we are different than other cultures. Like we're different than Americans. It kind of drives me nuts when people are like Canadians and Americans are the same. Like we're not the same.
Yeah.
And I mean, all Americans aren't the same either, and all Canadians aren't the same. Someone from the East Coast is not always the same as someone from the West Coast or from, the middle of the country.
Yeah.
And I think we need to embrace those strengths. I also think that entrepreneurs need to be aware of it. I mean, we went in and we bought a company in the UK, and then we bought a company in Australia 6 months later. Best and worst thing I've ever done. It's just now you're 24 hours.
Yeah.
And, we weren't done ingesting the first company, and then we acquired the second company on the other side of the world, and that made it really, really challenging. We burnt out a lot of people, including myself. Like there were times where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. It's like, I've been working 24 hours straight, and the sun never sets on the Certn empire, if you will. It was like, trying to go through being a founder to an operator is impossible when you're working 24 hours a day, almost 7 days a week. So it's hard. Like I would say, pick your battles. Choose where you want to go. Be really intentional about going there, and get to a place of stability before you try and go somewhere else. We see companies like Uber that, it seems like they're launching a new city or years ago now, they were launching a new city like every week. They were super intentional about that. They had like, big investment, strong teams that were going into these cities and launching in like a serious playbook. You've got to have that if you're going to try and go to multiple countries quickly. So, my advice is think global, respect the cultures, know the cultures, make sure you tailor your messaging to that culture, and then be methodical about it. Like build a plan, build a playbook for entering a new market, and every time you enter a new market, make sure you're tailoring it for the culture there.
With the acquisitions there, like not every founder or like company goes through that where they get to acquire other companies. How did you kind of think about those acquisitions from a strategic standpoint, absorbing that team or that product? Was it like strategic? Was it growth? Was it, hey, a new product line? How do you kind of think about acquisitions, and how do you think you kind of do them well?
So, I mean, there are a whole bunch of reasons to do acquisitions. I love acquisitions, and specifically when we did most of our acquisitions, it's a valuation arbitrage. So we were buying service-based businesses that were trading at, 3 to 6 times profit, and we were trading at 15 plus times revenue. So, you take your really strong currency and then you go and purchase a business that might even be bigger than yours. So the first business we bought was actually bigger in headcount and revenue than our core business.
Interesting.
And so that had a huge impact on our valuation. From a metrics perspective, it was incredible. And we knew that we had the technology and the growth capability to take that business and make it even bigger. So we, in the first year, we doubled that business, which was really cool. We also had the unique challenge that we couldn't enter the UK without acquiring a business, because you can't get the licenses that you need to do the work that we do as a new company. You can't just go and say, oh, I want to do background checks in the UK. There's a whole process, and they're not allowing new companies to get access to the information that you need to do this. For that reason, acquiring in the UK made a lot of sense, and same with Australia. In Australia, it's actually like even harder to become a background screening company. Like there will likely never be a new background screening provider that enters the Australian market, because every license has been purchased by a larger organization. So we saw that as a real opportunity, and that's why we did two of those acquisitions back to back, because it was like there was a window, and we needed to decide, okay, if we want to get in there, now is the time. We can get it for a price that we can afford, and if not, we kind of have to say goodbye to this market for indefinitely.
This is anecdotal to me, but like I would say, I feel like Certn to me is kind of like a sleeper company, and I don't mean that in like an offensive way, but just under the radar, like crushing it. Like, how do you kind of think about that? Has that been intentional? It's just the space you're in, being in Victoria? Like, I'm just curious. Like I think it's just super interesting.
We're in a super boring business, and I love that it's a super boring business. Because we can kind of fly under the radar. There's some days where I'm like, oh, I wish we had an awesome consumer product like Coho, so we could do, some of their marketing is absolutely incredible, the videos and stuff. And I'm like, that would be so cool. But at the same time, I really like it because when I show up to a conference or when I show up to an event, nobody's talking about Certn, but I go talk to other founders or people and they're like, oh, I use Certn, or oh, I did my background check through Certn. And it's kind of cool being, under the radar, but at the same time, like the number of people in tech that have touched our service is huge.
What are your thoughts on like Canadian tech in general? Like I know we just had an election, there was, some tax things that were going to come in that didn't happen. Like how are you kind of thinking about everything, and maybe it's like your opinion on it, or maybe just more broadly, like and you talk to lots of Canadian founders and stuff, like what's your thoughts on that?
I think we have some of the best talent in the world in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that as a country we have been facilitating our capital appropriately. So I think we've tried to do something that is fair by making, lots of bets. I think Shred is a great program, for example, if it was more focused. And also if it was focused on Canadian companies, because the majority of Shred actually goes to companies that aren't Canadian, other than in name.
Yep.
I think we need to make fewer, bigger bets. I think we need to bet on our best entrepreneurs and really double down on those people. And I also think those people have a responsibility to talk about what they're doing and show the rest of Canada what we can do. I mean, there are countless incredible entrepreneurs that are from Canada that are living in the United States or in other parts of the world to start their business. I think as a country, we also need to look at, how do we improve the incentives to have people stay in Canada and build in Canada? You look at affordability, you look at our tax rates, you look at, all this kind of stuff. It makes it hard to live in Canada. So how do we incentivize people to start something? And then if they're willing to start something and they're willing to put in the work and they're being successful, how do we quadruple down on making them a global staple? Estonia's done it. I mean, Estonia's got more unicorns per capita than any country in the world. There's like 1 million people in that country. And you think of like Skype and Wise and all these companies that have come out of Estonia. Like, how are they doing it? We need to start thinking like them instead of thinking like our American counterparts. Like we keep thinking like, oh, what are they doing in the States? It's like the States and Canada aren't the same. Like we're fundamentally different countries. How are other countries that are maybe smaller? How are they punching above their weight? And how do we do that too?
If I gave you like a magic wand, would there be one thing that you would change? And there's probably like lots of things you'd love to change, but is there one thing that you think could change fairly easily that you think would have an interesting impact?
Government-wise, or just kind of
government, or just like, can the government be doing something, or maybe it's just like, could startups or like I don't know, like ecosystem-wise, like is there things that we could just be doing better?
I think making greater incentives for people to stay in Canada is the best thing that we can do, and I think. There are two factors. There's safety, which I think we're doing relatively well. We've got some challenges, in certain parts of Canada with physical safety, but generally okay. And then the other part is tax. We wouldn't lose, the brain drain wouldn't be happening if people were able to stay in Canada at the tax rates of Florida or Texas, for example. I mean, we're losing a lot of people to Florida and Texas who are building their businesses because they can get access to a labor force that is roughly equivalent in cost, maybe a little bit more, but their take-home pay is larger and their cost of living is lower. I mean, the amount that you have to pay for someone to live in Vancouver or Toronto with the cost of housing and stuff like that, it's wild. And they're giving 53% of their earnings to the government. So how do we fix that problem and encourage people to stay here? How do we make it so that people can be taking home more, and at the same time, having a really good living?
100%. How have things like AI like impacted Certn, from whether it's like the product specifically or how you're or like just how like the company is operating, like if you're using tools internally, like how have you kind of like thought about that?
Culturally, it's AI first
Mm-hmm.
for most things, I should say. So
Yeah.
for new headcount, you've got to show me if there's a net new headcount, you got to show me why AI can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a new hire, they have to be proficient in AI. Like that is AI proficiency is now a requirement in every new job spec. If you are not using OpenAI, Anthropic, if you are not using the tools, you don't get a job at Certn. And that doesn't matter the level from entry level to above. Not everybody's going to be there. You know, we offer programs and we encourage self-study for people to go and learn.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a requirement of the job. We are AI first. In terms of how it's impacted us, I mean, we have agents that are handling internal HR questions. We have agents that are handling legal questions. We have agents that are handling support. We have agents that are handling the manual processing of work. The area that we can't use AI is we can't use AI to make decisions. Certn is a credit reporting agency, and we're required by law to be historians. So we can only talk about historical fact. We can't we can't make decisions based on people, even if it's based on their history. So we really have to focus AI on making sure that we can get that information better quality information faster than anybody else so that we can deliver the best possible service to our customers so they can make the decisions about the employees or the tenants or the borrowers.
I'm not super nuanced on like how regulated the space is, but I assume there is some regulations with identity checking. I'm curious, like, what would be your advice, or like if you look back on the early days of Certn of like, you know, moving fast and breaking things as a startup, but also there's a regulatory environment that you need to kind of deal with, work with, things like that.
I'm envious of people that are starting companies now.
Yeah.
Because you don't have as big of a trade-off now between moving fast and breaking things and being stable and secure. AI has changed that so much and is going to continue to change it. So yeah. I would say if I was to start a business now, I would be more in the camp of move fast and break things as opposed to, you know, how do we build this for stability? In 2017, when we started Certn, my philosophy was, you know, you've got to reinvent your company every 18 months.
Yeah.
If you look at the releases that, you know, OpenAI or Anthropic or, you know, any of the AI companies are coming out with now, it's more like 8 weeks or less. You know, we're seeing companies explode with growth and die in a matter of like, you know, a dev cycle.
Yeah.
Like a dev cycle of like 2017.
Yeah.
So I think it's critical that we make sure that we're focusing on the right things.
I think last question for me is just like, as you're getting close to like that 10-year mark, like what are the biggest lessons or takeaways? Maybe it's like one thing, maybe it's like 2 or 3 things that you take away, like have been building the business this long, reaching those milestones, because, you know, a very small percentage of companies can get to that point.
So key takeaway for me is once you start to get to scale, how do you start to become an operator as much as a founder? The hardest challenge for me that I really struggled with for the last couple of years is how do I stop being a founder? You know, there's this whole founder mode thing, which, you know, I completely agree with.
Yeah.
But you have to do it sustainably and you have to do it effectively. And to me, that's becoming an operator. You're never going to lose that drive as a founder. You're never going to lose that curiosity. You know, you shouldn't have to do that, but it's how do you operationalize things? How do you create the right teams? Founders need to spend more time with founders at scale to learn how to become operators and not just hustlers.
Yeah.
Because I love the hustle.
Yeah.
But it doesn't scale. You start to get hundreds of employees and that can't be the way that you work. I think the other thing for me is kind of this experience paradigm. So you need to hire people for learning velocity, propensity for change at a stage that is just ahead of where you are now. A lot of founders, including myself, have made the mistake of trying to hire someone who has seen really, really big scale. And they may be the hardest worker and the smartest person and and an incredible human being. It's just really hard to learn what it's like to be at a startup. That learning curve is actually much more challenging than learning, a new skill. It's way harder to learn growth company than it is to learn background checks.
Yeah.
It's, we want to get to 100 million in revenue. We need to find people that have seen 100 million in revenue, not 100 billion. Because, and seen people that have gone from, where we are today to 100 million and beyond and have done it effectively. And again, not that person that was there at, 100 billion.
Andrew, thanks for making this happen. You actually inspired this. You helped a lot of these guests for today's interviews make this happen. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
This is great.